Hi everyone, thank you for coming. My name is Bill Kartalopoulos. I'm the programming coordinator here at SPX. I've also taught classes about comics in New York. I'm also a organizer of the Brooklyn Comics and Graphics Festival that's happening in November this year, among a lot of other activities. Over the last several years, I've been teaching a class called Comics History in New York. And I remember, I think one of the first times I taught it, one of the things that I realized was that some of my students were sort of getting underground comics, meaning like Clowes comics and comics of the 60s and 70s, sort of confused with what I had been referring to in class as alternative comics. And I think the students weren't very familiar with this material. They all kind of blended together because they were black and white comics that may or may not have, like penises in them, basically. And therefore were, stood kind of together apart from superhero comics and things like that. But so that sort of forced me in a way to kind of refine the way that I was teaching the class, because I do think there was a sort of very distinct period in comics history that came after underground comics that I think we can fairly say is over now, because it really precedes a time when the graphic novel came to the fore. Unfortunately, a lot of the people who emerged during that time, like our esteemed panelists here today, are still working, but they've changed the formats in which they're working, and certainly the way the work is distributed has changed. Certainly the audience has changed, right? All these things. So I kind of wanted to take the amazing opportunity of the presence of these four artists here today, who I think were heavily involved in defining what alternative comics might even be, if we're still producing amazing work, to kind of take a little stock and talk about what the context was like when they started making work and how that's different from where we are now. So first of all, please join me in welcoming Dan Clowes, Gilbert Hernandez, Jaime Hernandez, and Adrian. One of the risks when you start turning things into historical periods is that things get radically oversimplified. And one of the things I think is interesting about having you guys all here is that I think all of you, just by entering the field maybe a few years ahead of one of your peers here, sort of changed the context for everyone else. Like Jaime and Gilbert, when you entered this field, it was like just frontier territory. And I think, Dan, when you started making comics, the world had been changed by their work.
Absolutely. These guys had paved the way. They did the first comic where I felt like, oh yeah, maybe I should send something to this publisher. This is sort of in line with what I want to do. There's nothing there.
Yeah, some of the stuff, like I showed some of my students, like images of work that was sort of coming out around the same time that like Love and Rockets started coming out, and it's like this was a period where we had like
be nice.
Kind of like the emerging like mature superhero comic, and some kind of what were called at the time ground level comics, right? Like Cerebus and Elfquest and things like that, and there were some other, kind of odd things, like, maybe Will Eisner starting to make some of his long-form work for mature readers, and of course, Raw and Weirdo, which started in 1980 and 81, respectively. And of course, the Comics Journal really setting the tone. But you can see that the Comics Journal at that time, which still would have like, Han Solo and Green Lantern on the cover, was like not the Comics Journal certainly that I grew up with. And one of the things that I love looking at some of those old issues, I always kind of thought that there's this kind of myth about Love and Rockets, that you guys were, just sort of doing your own thing, reading the Comics Journal, you made your zine and you sent it in, and Gary published it, and that's true, but I see that you also you must have had some other contact with Gary before that, I guess, or with other people at the Comics Journal, because there were all these like spot illustrations. I guess, can you talk a little bit about these? It seems like these are kind of remnants of a sort of fanzine culture, maybe.
Yeah, Jaime and I, we grew up in the house with old fanzines. I mean, besides comics and all that stuff, but it would, our older brother Martin used to collect fanzines. So we had the idea that if you didn't do professional comics, you were just involved in fanzines. It pretty much was that. We started looking at fanzines. I don't know how Jaime started looking at fanzines. I don't know how that started. He'll explain how that started, but all of a sudden we were getting the buyer's guide in the house and the comics journal. And I don't know, I guess part of that was like Mario was getting the comic reader, I guess it was, and the Menominee Falls Gazette, that kind of thing. And it was just a continuation of comics. We were bored of Marvel and DC at the time, so we were looking at different types of comics. And when we saw, basically, in the buyer's guide in the comics journal, there were spot yellows. We just had a bunch of stuff laying around. Just like, oh, it's a fanzine, so you do a drawing of, Golden Age Iron or Silver Age Iron Man. It was just sort of, well, that's what you do. Wasn't like, finally I get to draw Iron Man. Well, actually, half of it was that. But I just thought, nostalgia was always big into fandom, right? We knew that. It was like, well, if you do the old days, they'll grab it and love it and say, why don't they have comics like this anymore? But it was they were more like whims. Today I'll draw Iron Man and send it in. Actually, there's a couple of editors, like a guy from the Buyer's Guide, that thought it was dumb that we were doing these kind of drawings. Like I did, I think it was an Iron Man drawing, Commando Cody from the serials. I did one of those. Well, this is not the kind of science fiction we approve of here, but we'll take the drawing because it's good. This is what, fanzine guys are like. They're still like that total fucking asshole. So we just went for there, but it was just more as just a goof. It's just to get our drawings up there because nobody had ever seen our comics or our drawings before. And it was just easy to do spot yellows instead of trying to break through stories. So I guess Jaime can add more.
These are a couple of your spots.
Oh. So we were sending this stuff to the buyers. Well, they used to be called the Buyer's Guide for comics. And the Comics Journal. I didn't know that the Comics Journal guys thought I was kind of dorky for giving them superhero willows. And I was like, that's what your magazine's about. I thought I was supposed to draw superheroes for them. The comics I was drawing for myself was something else. But this was just, I remember, I somehow came across money, so I started subscribing to magazines. That was new to me. I was getting Cream magazine and the Comics Journal and the Buyer's Guide and stuff like that. And it was just an opportunity. I just wanted to see my stuff in print, show my stuff off, even if it was just the superhero stuff. We were planning, we were doing, our own comics on the side, but just had no clue of how to get it out there. We didn't have money to print the stuff.
And when you did start publishing this work, you kind of did a self-published version of the first issue of Love and Rockets, I think in 1981, and then this Fantagraphics edition came out a year later. It's kind of interesting to see like some of the sort of house ads that Fantagraphics was running at the time, where it kind of seems almost as if they're sort of pitching it as if it's a kind of weird superhero comic or a weird sci-fi comic or an erotic superhero, clearly they're trying to appeal to, I guess, whatever was perceived as the context at the time. Did you really think that this was, I guess, a work that was sort of stuck being defined within a superhero dominant context?
Yeah, for me, it was, even if we moved away from that stuff after several issues, it was still regarded as, oh, I get it. It's a comic book about superheroes, but the superheroes are not there. And that lasted for, I understand that in the early days, but it lasted till well into the magazine. That was still the perception of it. And every time we say, well, we don't do superheroes, well, yes you do, and they'll bring out issue 2 or something, and we just couldn't get away from that. That's when we got really uptight about being compared to Watchmen and Dark Knight and that kind of stuff. And the kid's like, well, your comic's like that too. And I go, no, it's not. You know, it's a little different. It's about other things. But would you have superheroes too? And they would bring that in. And, so we were supposed to like Watchmen and Dark Knight and that stuff as well. And then after a while, I just became a dick, as I normally would. Saying, no, we're not like that. We don't want to be, he leaped in with American flag. We don't want to be leaped in with, Cerebus and that stuff. We don't want to. This is our comic. We want to do something else. Even though, but sure enough, like 10 years later, nope, but you have superheroes here. You have a panel with a superhero, so you're a superhero comic. So that was really hard to get away from, and that really irritated me. Like these issues you're showing here, those don't have superheroes in it, but for some reason there was this concept that the superheroes just weren't in the panel.
And Love and Rockets, very quickly it seems, or I don't know if it was quick or not, but it seems like it became iconic or really at least important to other artists who are thinking of doing work like this. And even though I think of you guys and Dan as peers, by the time even like the first Lloyd Llewellyn came out in 1986, Love and Rockets had been running for 4 years, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I actually hadn't heard of Love and Rockets when it first came out. I was kind of out of the whole comics thing because it was such a wasteland in the early 80s. I used to go to the comic store and just like, is there anything new by Steve Ditko? It's like, no. I think he's working on Rom the Space Knight. And so I was mostly just buying old comics and doing other things. And when I first, the Lloyd Llewellyn story I did, that was the very first thing I did with the character. It was like I was trying to get work as an illustrator in New York and taking my portfolio around and just like getting nothing, like hearing nothing from art directors. And I was like really despondent. And I thought I should just try drawing a comic. I haven't done that in a long time. And literally, the first panel, I thought, like, what should this guy's name be? Well, how about, like, Lloyd Llewellyn? It's got a lot of L's. That would be funny. So, I started thinking of, like, the Superman characters that were, like, Lex Luthor and Lois Lane. I thought, this will be the ultimate. But I had no anything at all thought beyond that. And I just sort of made up this stupid 8-page story as I went along, really to keep from, putting a gun muzzle down my throat. And when I finished it, I thought, like, well, what should I do with this? I should, like, try to get some feedback. And so I knew that there were all these, like, new publishers out there. There was Fantagraphics, and there was Eclipse, and there was Vortex, I think. And I sent it to 3 or 4 of those, and they just wrote back, like, this is not what we want at all. And I sent it to Fantagraphics. I actually sent them a colored version of the story that I paid a lot of money to ship out to wherever the hell they were at that time. And then I heard nothing. It was like a month. And I thought, like, God, the guy didn't even send me my thing back. What a jerk. And one day, on a Sunday afternoon, I get a phone call, and he's like, oh, this is Gary Groth, and I'd like to give you your own comic book. And I actually didn't even recognize his name. I remember thinking, like, that sounds sort of familiar. And I realized, oh, he's the guy who writes for the Comics Journal. And I was so not ready. I just wanted some feedback. I just wanted, like, stick to it, keep at it. And instead, it was, it was like just getting the prize without having to do any of the work. It felt like I wasn't worthy of it yet. And then the first thing he tells, and then at that time, I started reading Love and Rockets and was like, oh boy, I'm not ready to compete with these guys. And the first thing he tells me is like, we're going to promote it by letting your first story appear in Love and Rockets. And I was just like, really? Do I have to?
Did that happen?
It did happen. Issue gets 13 has a Lloyd Llewellyn story that I drew on the floor of my grandmother's house.
Yeah, when Gary said, hey, check out this guy's stuff, and he showed me the color stuff Dan sent him. And he goes, and you know what? I said, hey, we can't really afford to do color. Can you do black and white? And you know what he said? He said, sure.
Because I
How much do I have to pay you to do
Dan's
this?
thing was in color, so I thought, oh, this guy's a pro, man. And we were like, oh, wow, so he'll do black and white, cool. That's
I mean, I remember when they sent it in, they were like, we don't get anything that's not like a Cerebus imitation or like an elf thing or superheroes. Like I think they just published it. It was like the first thing was just a normal guy. You know, it could have been anybody.
Do you remember what other titles Fantagraphics might have been publishing around then? Because I know there were a lot of like memory hold
There weren't
titles,
many
like
yet.
Dalgota or whatever.
Not yet.
Was neat stuff.
Neat Stuff came out right before Lloyd Llewellyn, and there was a comic called Hugo about the night. That was a really well done, kind of Terry Toons style crazy comic. And that's, what else was there?
Don
We need
Rosa's
to-
comics.
What was it?
Don Rosa's comics and stories. Came
Yeah,
out at the
Don
same
Rosa
time as
had
Love and
some.
Rockets 1. The guy who did Ducks.
One thing that's kind of interesting is, because I found like those Love and Rockets promotional ads, and it's interesting to see the way the work gets promoted and how even after a few years this sort of changes a little bit.
I was so pissed off at that. I was just like, really?
So they would like
That's
8-ball
the way
baby
to do it, you know, it's like, no, come on. I mean, Fantagraphics certainly at that time did not have any, professional advertising people working for them. So, it was, I'm sure that was just some intern. Kim said, like, can you do an ad?
He did his voice. One of the things although one of the things about this is that I think that even in the relatively small number of years between the debut of Love and Rockets and the debut of 8-Ball, you can see how Love and Rockets is like this thing that's kind of happening almost in the desert. Like there's this superhero culture that doesn't sustain this Love and Rockets thing. Here it seems like you're beginning to see an attempt to sort of tap into a kind of broader subcultural zeitgeist. Like there's something about this that to me is very like 90s, that kind of like Richard Linklater slacker attitude.
There was Fantagraphics had a guy, Larry Reed, who was kind of involved in the rock promotion world and in the art world. And he saw Hate and 8-Ball, and he just said, like, I can sell these to hipster kids who listen to grunge rock. And he just was like, he knew he could do that, and we're like, do what you will, and he figured out how to get them into record stores, like skateboard shops, and all that stuff that now you sort of take for granted that, it's part of that culture, but back then it was really like so hard to make that transition. And all of a sudden, like Pete Bagg and I and these guys would start to see like that kind of guy who was in a band would come to our signings, and it was a very different kind of thing all of a sudden.
Yeah, and it is interesting, and like one of the things is that I think of, especially once you get into the 80s and the 90s, it's kind of this last sort of like subcultural moment before the internet. You have this kind of zine culture, this sort of general, alternative culture. And it seems like Love and Rockets and 8-Ball and later Optic Nerve were seen as part of that. Did you feel
absolutely.
Did you feel like that, or did you just feel like your audience was
I certainly did, didn't you? Although I remember with Your Flesh, that guy actually paid a lot of money for those covers. It seems like this in a throwaway zine, but it was like the most money I ever got up to that point.
Did you feel like, I know that you guys, Gilbert just came out of punk rock, did you feel like your comics were connecting with the kind of subculture outside of comics?
It's all flow. There was never any like moments of we got it. Like, wow, we're punk rock, but we're comics. But it was like my Palomar stories are so not punk rock. See, that's what it was hard for me to. I really like the fact that Jaime's worked directly into punk rock, because then it was the band stuff and like hot girls and stuff like reading our comics. So it was like, wow, this is all we need to do. Now let's try to figure out how to make money. or make a living, I should say. But all this stuff people have to tell me, you know, well, this is where your position in comics were, this is where you were at the time of cultural change and stuff. They have to tell me that stuff, but to me it was just drawing the next issue. It was just a natural, I never second guessed it, never thought, I mean, I've tried with mainstream comics, what do the kids like? Always failed. So the only time it's worked is just my recent book, Fatima, because it's about zombies, because people like zombies, and I did a zombie comic. Simple as that, just, you know. Yeah. But that's the only time it actually connected to people thinking like, this will sell, even though I don't know if it's selling.
And one of the things about this stuff, like I think of these comics, and to me they seem to have this almost iconic kind of quality, in part because during this time, you sort of had to go looking for them. And this is something that I always feel like I now have to emphasize with students. Like, I tell them about, like, this is like an issue of Fact Sheet 5, you know, with like, you know, zine reviews in it. And I feel like I have to sort of explain to like 18-year-old students what it is to live in a world where you send well-concealed $1 bills to a P.O. box address based on a 2-sentence review of a zine that you read in a badly printed magazine that has like articles about Satanism in it.
You know, I mean, I'm sure these guys too, but I used to get 40 or 50 letters a week, and not just letters, but like novels. Like people, they had nobody else to talk to. They had no, you know, no internet, no Facebook or anything. They would just pick somebody like me or Jaime and write letters that were just to tell every aspect of their lives. And I was going through these recently, and it was literally inconceivable the amount of time these people must have put into these letters. And I'd write back a postcard like, "Thanks for writing." But also you get like packages, like silkscreen T-shirts that people made. And it was like every 3 days I'd go to the post office, and it was like Christmas. It was just like, what am I going to get now? What presents do I get? And I still have a P.O. box. I haven't gotten a letter in like 2 years. It's so different.
Yeah, I remember getting letters from someone who said, you know, I live in a trailer park up in the middle of New Mexico, and I read your issue over and over again all summer. You know, and the letter, you could tell that that letter was a big part of their connecting, because they drew all over, you know, every inch of the outside of the envelope, you know, and you just tell they just put a lot of work into it because they just wanted that connection, you know, and it was cool. But like Dan said, sometimes I wouldn't even write back.
You just have too much. We used to get a lot of prison letters too. That was one issue of Lloyd Llewellyn, and they're like, that's all they knew about your work, and it was just like they focused so much attention on this one issue. And it was, I never knew where to write back to the prison guys, because it's like, well, I have my address published in the magazine. Oh, when I get out for dual manslaughter, I'll pay you a visit. Can I crash on your floor when I get paroled?
Well, outside of those particular situations, why do you think people connected so strongly to the work at the time?
It's not for us to say.
Yeah. I mean, I like to say that because the work's personal and you're somehow making that connection. But like you said, you know, you got to ask them.
There was such a, from my point of view, there was just such a gap. This stuff was necessary in comics and in pop culture, if you want to call it. I can't tell you enough how shitty Marvel and DC comics were at the time. You know, and how comics were, and how they treated the artists that worked on these books, and how the business was. And that's why the Comics Journal was so nasty at the time. I mean, Gary had a personal vendetta, but at the same time, I mean, he wanted to crush those companies. He wasn't able to do it, so he had a magazine, so he could just, I want to destroy them with my atomic words. You know? But that was good at the time because it did shake things up. But then the companies started going, what's going on here? And then Rubber Rockets came out and they were working in the 8-ball and Heat Meat stuff and Adrian's book, and it was still like for a long time. I was like, whoa, what's going on here? What do we do? You know, what can we do here? So they did shitty imitations, you know, that just went away, you know. But they sort of like are safe now because now they make blockbuster movies and stuff. So the companies are saved by that. But I think it's pretty bad. I mean, a lot of people are leaving DC and Marvel now, and it's not as happy as they would like to sell it, you know. But yeah, but especially at that period of starting out in the early 80s, it's just the Marvel DC had just become impossible to add. And I mean, I know everybody has nostalgia for it because they were, 10 when they read those comics, and that's understandable. It is. But from my point of view, it's like there had to be a little Rockets and like 8-Ball and Hate, and just all that stuff, coming out because it was just dismal. The alternative was nothing.
We should also mention that one of the things that surprised me when I started tracking this history a little more closely was just how early Chester Brown started too. He was just like a couple years after you guys. It was like you, Loving Rockets and Yummy pretty much, it seemed like.
Yeah, Chester, we found him out at first with mini comics, his mini comics, before it was an actual comic.
And Adrian, you started making minis too. This is an image of the facsimile reproduction set of your first Optic Nerve mini comics. These started in 1991. And by this point, Loving Rocket's been going for close to 10 years. 8-Ball been coming out for a few years. How did the landscape of, what alternative comics might be look to you when you started publishing this stuff? Did it seem like it was like a fertile field at that point?
Yeah, I'm nervous being up here, actually. I think I really had, all the hard work done for me, and I just sort of got to coast in at a great moment, really. I didn't really have kind of a angry attitude towards mainstream comics because I didn't feel competitive with them. I didn't feel like they were quite as dominant as they were before these guys kind of carved out a separate niche that's, a different thing, not a ghetto within the mainstream world. So, I felt like it was like I think the timing was just really perfect for me to become, to end up like on this stage at this moment. It's like really, everything lined up right for like being, the age where I kind of felt like I outgrew the superhero comics that I was collecting. And then to be able to just, walk around the corner of the comic shop and then find their comic there. And just, 1 week I bought my last issue of New Mutants or whatever. And then the next week I bought Love and Rockets. And then, there was no shortage of, I didn't have to like scrounge around for inspiration.
Were you living in a city at the time that had a pretty good
I'm called Fresno, a city.
Just kind of keeping the track of promotional imagery going. This is the cover of the first issue of the Drawing Quarterly Optic Nerve series, and on the right is a promotional postcard. And it almost feels like we've kind of gone through this arc from like the the kind of weird superhero through like the kind of angry young man of 8-Ball, and this almost looks like it could be an advertisement for like a Hal Hartley movie or something like that. It seems like there's been some kind of cultural shift from the kind of angry outsider to kind of more sort of neo-sincere.
Yeah, there's nothing rebellious about my work. I wasn't fighting against anything. I don't think there's a lot of influence of superhero work in what I was publishing at this time. I did grow up reading some of it, but it wasn't so deeply ingrained in me that I had to sort of purge it or anything.
Did you feel like you were speaking to, or at least trying to address, a broader audience maybe than just a comics reading audience? Because I remember seeing these issues of Optic Nerve for the first time, and it seems really basic now, but I think a lot of people were just impressed by the fact that, like, if I can call it this next one, these are just a couple of great Optic Nerve covers. I think a lot of people were just impressed by the fact that, like, oh, these don't even look like they come from comics culture. They look like movie posters or record album covers or something like that. Did you feel like you were trying to address maybe a broader potential audience with that?
No, I've always felt like I was getting, like, since even before that, with my mini comics, I was sort of felt like I was getting a bigger audience than I had even expected to begin with. It was sort of like I wasn't like sitting there thinking, how can I get this out to more people? And the design work and everything was just, really not not thought out at all. It was not like, what can I do that will be different from something else or anything. It's just, I don't know, whatever came to me. And I mean, even a lot of that definitely had its roots in Love and Rockets and 8-ball covers, because those do have some connection to older comics, but also did a lot of stuff that I'd never seen before.
I feel like like a lot of these other artists, Gilbert and Jaime did record album covers. I know Dan, yesterday you talked about some of your record album covers and how it's not really. In some cases, you said that you didn't even necessarily listen to the records. It's just kind of illustration.
I listened to one of those 4 records and see if you can figure it out.
I think Adrian, like your work kind of connected with a kind of broader audience that maybe identified with certain kinds of independent culture. I mean, did you feel?
Is that independent culture?
Well, I don't know. I mean, what do you think? Or was this just commercial work for you?
That was like a mainstream record label that had a lot of money to throw around, wasn't it?
Yeah. And since then, certainly, in addition to record companies, publishing companies have sort of come calling. And I think a lot of things started to change when the book publishing and retail industry started really getting seriously interested in comics. This to me was like a super iconic, for better or for worse, super iconic moment in 2004 when the New York Times Magazine ran this big cover feature on the not funny comics or whatever, whatever, we started to see a lot more of this kind of mainstream regard for comics. Again, your work appearing in the New York Times Magazine, Adrian, frequent New Yorker cover artist. You've got a book of that stuff now. We've seen, Jaime's work all over the place. Gilbert, and even now you and Kirsten Hirsch have taken your collaboration from independent record labels to like Penguin Books here. So things have obviously changed a lot, and certainly the formats have changed too. I mean, Love and Rockets is now a kind of annual book. Dan, you said that you're done with 8-ball as a series.
Well,
it's dead. And you're
It's
just
dead
doing
for
books.
right now. I never make any decisions for more than like 1 book ahead. I might go back to it right after that. I have no idea what I'm doing after the thing I'm working on now. So.
Yeah, it's kind of like when an artist says, I'm retiring. I'm not going to do
Like
anything.
Steven Sutton.
Artists never retired, because that's what you are, And just because you haven't done something 5 years doesn't mean you're not an artist. Sorry.
No. But in this case, I mean, you're still making art, but you're making art in very different formats, certainly than you used to. That certainly seems to be the way of things now. I mean, Gilbert and Jaime, could you talk a little bit about the switch to the book format, like how that was presented to you and what you think about it?
Well, for the most part, it was simply that our books did well in bookstores, in different outlets than comic book stores, because of the reprint books, the collections. Because you're just not going to sell a lot of floppies in a bookstore, unless it's the comic rack by the magazines with superhero comics. But the problem was that the bookstores weren't getting any new stuff from us. It was always reprints, and we were still doing the comics. So it was basically that, the shift to getting our new stories directly to the bookstores, because we just, at Fantagraphics, they're always trying to get away from the comic book store, because we just, they're just always looking for a different angle how to get our work, out there. And that was the reason for that. At first, it was daunting because we would be doing the comic book, and that would mean Jaime and I would be working on 14 pages an issue. Right? And at the time, that was a lot of work for us. The idea to jump from 14 pages to 50 pages an issue, even if it was a yearly thing, was daunting because we just hadn't practiced doing it that way. We just hadn't been doing a long comic at a pop each time. So that was a little hard work at first. It's still a lot of hard work. It's the hardest we've done because it takes so long to do it. But that was really more about just what they call reinventing, just figuring out a new way to present our work. And on the plus side, though, having the more pages is just expanding our vision, re-expand it, because I think we're doing better stories because we have the larger format, and we can explore more. We can, the best we can, finish a story within a book now, instead of doing it over several issues, and then collecting it later. So I don't know if Jaime has more to say about that.
No, but look at the cover. It's a superhero comic.
Yeah, Adrian, you recently published an issue of Optic Nerve, and you had a kind of Optic Nerve number 12, and you had a kind of satirical comic strip story in it. I think it was called The Last Pamphleteer, and you're sort of in it. You depict yourself kind of lamenting the loss of the old comic book format. Do you feel strongly that something has been lost by moving away from that format?
I mean, I really just have like a fear of change in general. So it wasn't like I was taking some big stand or anything. I just was like, if possible, can I just keep working the way I've always worked? And Drawing Quarterly was nice enough to allow me to do that. And as a fan, I mean, I love the beautiful hardcover books, but I also miss reading letters, columns, and little hand-drawn ads and plugs for mini comics, and all that kind of stuff was an exciting part of the whole thing. But I mean, I know there's nothing, you can't turn back the clock or anything. And I think being able to put this issue out in the next few is just, it's kind of like Drawing Quarterly being nice to me.
I mean, does anyone feel that anything has been lost in the transition to bookstore culture?
I kind of miss, maybe because I'm an old guy, I kind of miss reading a comic, 25-page comic, and then putting it away. I get these huge collections, these big fat things, and I can't finish them. So I kind of miss that little personal one-shot thing that you can read and then put it down and then look at the next one. I mean the big fat things is cool because they're collecting stuff I never thought I would ever see. Back when we were starting, you couldn't get big fat collections of old Dick Tracy strips or hardly ever, and stuff like that. But as far as new material, big fat stuff, sometimes I don't want to read a thing as big as Blankets just because it's like so big. Am I gonna ever finish that thing? Or sometimes you get it and you want to sit in a chair and relax and read it, and you fold this thing out. Like I said, I'm old. I'm set in my ways. But so like I do kind of miss that little compact.
I miss doing Living Rockets as a comic book because I am doing so much work that's long. It is fun to do a comic like Fatima because it's 20 pages and I do it and then it comes out, pretty frequently. I like to I grew up reading comic books, so I do like, doing a comic book that's, hey, I finished it. It's done. It's not. You don't have to wait a year for this thing to come out. Like Fatima is great because you do stuff for Dark Horse because you do the 4 issues pretty much at once, and then they come out monthly. And that's really weird. That's almost like too fast. The first issue of Fatima came out, and people were saying, I like this comic, this and that. And then the second issue was like literally days later. And by the time I get the response, the second issue is already out. So I do like that. I do miss Living Rockets being short, where I can just focus on doing a story, and then it goes out, and it's a new comic out in the stands with a new cover, and that the newness and the frequency of it was fun. Comparative frequentness of it. But artistically, I think the bigger books are better, but I do miss doing the short bursts of comics for Living Rocket stories.
people bring a different set of standards depending on the format, even if it's subconscious. And I've certainly benefited from that. I mean, like to put up an issue of optic nerve now, and people are reading, like, oh, that was pretty good. Okay, that's great. Just move on to the next thing. But when you put out a big hardcover book and it's getting reviewed, you know, I think people expect a lot more. And you know, so sometimes, like in my case or in other artists' case, I think they've sometimes been unfairly penalized for the nice format of it. If it was like in a small little pamphlet, you think, oh, a great comic, but then you see it dressed up really nicely. It wasn't as great as they expected or something. I don't know. That's just a feeling I have.
In what ways do you think entering the comics field now is, and you could pick one or speak to both, either more or less challenging than it was when you started out?
I don't even know what the comics field is.
Maybe that's it.
I mean, I always feel like I'm sort of like in the eye of the hurricane, and I can't quite see what's going on around me. You know, people are always asking me, what's the future of comics? And it's like, what am I, Kreskin? I don't know. I have no idea. I literally, it could be exactly the same 10 years from now. It could be that, you know, there's no paper at all, you know, who knows? And then I think all of us have to just sort of keep in the moment and try to, you know, do our comics in real time and not worry about all that kind of stuff. 'Cause it's only paralyzing if you ponder those kind of things.
That's true. We have a few minutes to take some audience questions, if there are any. Yes?
I'd be interested in what the panelists have to say about the distribution and I guess the venues in which you now see your work displayed. Like, for example, in library systems now, at one time this was such a marginalized population of people that were viewing your work, and now they're featured in libraries. But at the same time, quite often you have youth that doesn't take advantage of the resources of like something like the library system because you have the internet. So what do you think of your work being displayed there?
I like that it's in library. I mean, I hear a lot of people who say, you know, I never read any comics, I never heard of you. I saw Ghost World in my high school library, and that's how I got into it. And that's, you know, it's great.
I'll take what I can get.
Yeah,
I feel there's maybe a couple of figures at least that need to be woven into this narrative.
There's a lot of figures.
Well, I was wondering in particular Harvey Picar, how he fits into that chronology, especially for Jaime and Gilbert. And then also a little bit later on, Joe Sacco, in terms of making comics respectable or more serious for larger readership.
I think we lost that battle long ago. You know, that for a while there was like, oh, Rockets, you gotta see this comic. It's about real people, real life, and then different kinds of comics came out. And then Button Rockets is now a wacky fantasy comic. You know, it's my stuff especially is looked at as just these crazy fantasies now. And it's weird. It used to be the realistic comic. But different comics have gone a different way. So Harvey Picar, I mean, what was the question again about Harvey? Just his influence?
Where he fits into this chronology.
It's sort of after the underground, but before these guys. You know?
Yeah, I give him credit for you know, doing that just out of nowhere, just wanting to do that, and he really lucked out with Crumb, just getting attention from Crumb.
Yeah.
With Crumb, but his other stuff without Crumb is just as good. Yeah, I'll give Harvey a lot of credit. Poor guy's gone, and he can't hear this, but you know, what can he? Not really. His like I said in previous interviews, the best of American Splendor, the early issues. Had I seen those as a teenager, that would have been extremely profoundly influential on me. But I didn't see it till the Comics Journal started writing about it in the late 80s, I guess. So I really missed that out, and you know, I'm glad I caught up to it. But like I said, there's certain artists that I was really influenced by, and I still use in my work. And he would have been tremendously influential had I seen this.
Picar entered the comics field at like almost like the worst possible moment you could have too. It was like 1976 when the first issue of American Splendor came out. It's like the last head shop's closed. Let's make an underground comic book. I mean, it's amazing that he persevered through those early years of publishing that. Any other questions? Yes.
I wanted to hear about the process of writing different types of stories than DC and Marvel, considering different backgrounds. Being a Latina, I'm very drawn to, especially the Hernandez brothers, but Jaime can also speak to that, to have people that look like you represented in a comic book, rather than just DC, Marvel, superhero fantasy like dudes.
Well,
I think I'll stay out of this one.
meaning like, how do we approach something like that? In the beginning, when we started our comic, it was easy because all there was, okay, not all there was, but mostly there was Marvel and DC. Well, we said, we don't see people we recognize in these comics. Let's draw it. It was that simple, you know. Oh, they don't have people of color. Let's do people of color. You know, it was, for us, it wasn't like what we see in comics is influences. It was what we weren't seeing in comics, you know. So it was pretty easy to be groundbreaking in that respect, you know, because it was such an open thing. I mean, comics were so dumb in those days.
I mean, I was pretty naive in that regard when I started out, and I think I do interviews where they'd say, why aren't you drawing characters that look like you? And like, because of my, you know, pampered life that I lived, I was like, I am drawing people that look like me. Then when I finally, you know, made it explicit and did a book with a bunch of Asian characters, it was, you know, people got angry about it. Or sort of appalled by some of the characters in that. So, you know, I think that was always in my mind, but it just wasn't exactly the way that was being expected.
Yes.
I think, I mean, we kind of brought this up, but having like the actual issues of you guys can tell stories like currently, long form stories like common law, sex, within the same issue. And now, you know, you have to get like a long graphic novel, and it's something lost in there, especially for maybe like emerging artists trying to break into it and have a long form.
I think that's kind of a problem. Yeah, I don't think, you know, new cartoonists are working hard and they're good. They can handle 500 pages or even 100 pages. You know, that's why anthologies are good, but anthologies always fail for some reason. I've seen a lot of terrific artists that start out in anthologies and you know, couldn't handle doing more than 10 pages, just because it takes training and it takes a certain kind of personality. You know, I can do it because I'm me. I can do it, but that doesn't mean that it's just a normal thing to do. Like, well, here you go. You're an artist now. Do 200 pages. Well, I can still do 8. Sorry. You know?
Yeah, it'd be great for young artists to try to work in that comic format, you know, even if nobody buys it, even if they have to hand them out to everybody, because you find out what people respond to. You know, people often respond to one little panel in some throwaway story you did to fill up the bottom half of the letters page or something. You know, and that's how you can sort of say, oh yeah, I can get away with this and not that. You know, that's what you learn.
What are your thoughts on the internet as a means of distribution? You talked about distributing your art to paintings and the copies and just closer poetry and the larger books. Do you think there's a loss of tangibility with like comics, or do you think it's just a way of like expanding?
Well, in my case, or I would say, I don't know if I could speak for them, but we do our comics as a comic, you know, on a page and stuff like that. The way it's going to be printed is only secondary, you know, so if it goes on the internet, like I said before, I'll take what I can get, you know, if I'm going to get more readers than that. I've never done web comics, I was done comics and they ended up somewhere, you know, printed somewhere. So from my point of view, it's not really different, you know, because I'm still just drawing my comics but with my hands and at my drawing board. You know, it's not like I go to a special room with 5 different screens. I'm going to do web comics. See? You know, it's so, for me, it's just, like I said, just draw the comics where they end up. Who knows?
For me, I actually have to like envision the final product, you know, and so I'll have a book in mind and I know basically what it's going to look like, and it's almost like I'm like chiseling away at a block of marble trying to achieve this like final sculpture. And so the thought of like imagining, you know, somebody's like saved link file or something, it's not something I can wrap my brain around. It's just not exciting for me to think of like, I'm done with my graphic novel, upload, you know. Like, that just doesn't seem like the excitement of opening that box and like, oh my gosh, they screwed up the printing again. That's a big moment. Giving that up.
Well, I have like my personal preferences about it, but I think in the big picture it doesn't really matter. You know, I mean, like, I could say, like, maybe I can, you know, con Drawn and Quarterly to publish 2 or 3 more issues of a comic book for me, but I don't know, in the long run, it's gonna, technology will run its course, the world will change, you know, and I'm just, like I said, you know, get some way to get the comics out there. It might not be my first choice, but it's better than not.
We can take one more question. Yes.
If I'm not mistaken, all 4 of you are fathers, and as a father-to-be, I'm very interested to know how becoming a parent has changed your work and how you work.
The main thing is when to work. You know, you move your life around, your schedule, your comic around your life, your home life. You know, hopefully, I mean, luckily, we're all able to still draw comics. I mean, it hasn't taken up everything, you know. But yeah, it's just scheduling more than anything.
I would say for me, it's actually affected the way I think of characters. Like I always thought of like the nature-nurture argument. I always thought the nurture side was weighted at like 90%, you know, and I just thought like, you know, all kids are basically equal when they're born, and it's all about the parenting and all the stuff you do. And I now see that it's absolutely the opposite. And that kids are really what they are. Their personalities come out very early, and you can see them as these people that are, you can sort of, you know, inflect the way they're going to be, and you can certainly like, you know, try to give them a good education and all that, but that really they are so much what they are without you doing anything about it. And to think of characters that way is really a different experience for me, to think of that they're sort of neurologically wired to be the way they are rather than, you know, traumatized into being the way they are.
The book that I'm slowly working on now, I like started basically right after my daughter was born, and I was very strategic. Like I kind of actually, for the first time, like sat down and thought about like, under what circumstances will I be creating this book, and how can I get through it, and how can I make it happen? And so even though I had a plan for like a really big, elaborate graphic novel, I just had to like make the decision like this wasn't the best time to do that. And so I'm doing short stories, a collection. It'll be a collection of short stories that I'm able to sort of, you know, focus on for a month or 2, and then sort of move on to something else. And I just don't like right now. I don't think I have the confidence or the ability to sustain even a drawing style or make the characters look the same for 5 years straight. So that was a definite choice, I think.
Gilbert?
My concerns, you know, are the only thing is that I have to have a steady paycheck, really. I mean, I gotta raise a daughter, have to, keep the naughty stuff away from her. She's dying to read Love and Rockets. I go, nope. She saw me draw the zombie comic and all the violence and stuff. She just shrugs it off, but then she gets curious about the naked ladies. You're fine with that, it's just weird, especially like when you're watching a movie and there's, if there's nudity in it, we just have to keep her mouth shut. We just don't want nothing but traumatizing. I mean, we won't allow her to see like a horrible rape scene or anything like that. But this is a woman walking across the screen with her showing her butt, or a guy even, we don't say a thing. We just, keep it quiet. We can tell she tenses up when she sees that stuff. I mean, we don't, I don't purposely show it to her, but movies now are so weird because I have to check the ratings now because it's weird because I had to learn about, because, I just ignored ratings, right, watching the experiment. Now having a daughter is like, okay, PG-13. They're going to talk about sex, or they can say cuss words, but it can't be referring to sex. It's just referring to it as a joke. Like, fuck you, man. That's PG-13, but like, I want to fuck you is R. And I learned all this stuff, and I was like, oh, I get it. It's it. So she goes, Dad, it's PG-13. Can we go see it? I go, yeah, but it might be too violent or something like that, She goes, but we won't let her see R rating. She's 12, and we won't let her see an R rating movie. Now, I'm hip. I know she's gonna sneak and see that stuff. That's fine, but I don't want to give her the trauma of like, there's something wrong with you for seeing this. I'm not gonna let that happen. I'm gonna let her, figure it out herself with her friends. That kind of stuff. So she doesn't go this. No, just movies. Real life.
On the street corner.
We park across the street with a flashlight. No, but that stuff is different. I don't know how that applies to my work though, but that's something I deal with every day. I don't know if that. I haven't been drawing kids and stories lately, so that's not a concern in my work. Except keeping it away from her.
Well, with that, please join me in thanking our guests for being here.